So welcome to what are we on, our fourth kindergarten drop-in session, specifically discussing French immersion. My name is Jordan Sloan, and I'm going to start with our territory acknowledgement, reconnaissance des terres. Nous reconnaissons que le travail d'ONlit se déroule sur des territoires autochtones traditionnels. Nous reconnaissons que 46 traités et autres accords couvrent le territoire qui s'appelle aujourd'hui l'Ontario. Nous sommes reconnaissants de pouvoir travailler sur ces terres et nous sommes reconnaissants envers les Premières Nations, aux Métis et aux Inuits pour les soins qu'ils apportent à ces terres, ainsi que les enseignements qu'ils en tirent. Cette reconnaissance nous rappelle nos responsabilités à l'égard de nos relations et des terres ancestrales sur lesquelles nous apprenons, travaillons et vivons. So welcome, everybody. I'm joining you from Reading for the Love of It in Toronto, and I'm happy to introduce Angeline Humber, who's also joining us from probably a hotel or Airbnb somewhere. And we're going to chat all things vocabulary development in kindergarten French immersion.
Yes, I'm joining you from the Northwest Territories Teachers Association conference in Yellowknife. So balmy minus feels like a balmy minus 48 today, but so excited to be here with you today to talk about vocabulary and immersion and connected to the new kindergarten curriculum. So just thinking about, so today we'll be having a quick overview of vocabulary and then give you a chance to ask questions and have some conversations in and around what that looks like and sounds like for you in your context. So thinking about that right to read and that quotation from it that talks about that explicit evidence-based instruction and building background and vocabulary knowledge and in reading comprehension strategies are all parts of comprehensive literacy instruction. And I do know that as French immersion educators, you always have that explicit piece in mind when it comes to building vocabulary, but how can we make those connections to that background knowledge and continue to support growth in vocabulary? And supporting also at that same time that comprehension piece. So thinking about this quote from the new kindergarten curriculum, the process of developing vocabulary truly involves acquiring new words and understanding their meanings when reading and listening and writing and speaking. And again, I'm making so many connections to what we know is part of French immersion, French as a second language learning, that piece about the listening and speaking and how they lead into that reading and writing, and knowing that as we learn new words, we're learning meaning, usage, form, and relationship to other words that we already know, and really wanting to develop that breadth and depth of their vocabulary. I know I've had the opportunity to work with educators above and beyond, like from K to 12, and oftentimes that's something I hear, particularly in and around grade 6, which is interesting, that the students have the same vocabulary that they had in grade 3. So really thinking about how can we continue to grow those vocabulary, their lexicons, and thinking about knowing that in some words have different meanings in different contexts, and knowing that they want to be able to link those meanings, thinking of those semantic features of words, and that there's different roles. So I know we're going to talk about a little bit about that as we go through things this evening. So thinking about where do we make those connections to the curriculum, so that strand A, foundations for language and mathematics, understanding that we want to be able to understand and use new words and develop that morphological awareness. And so I know for myself, as I was looking at the new curriculum, I was making a lot of connections to the Strive for Five book, and just that piece that we know good readers know lots of words, and particularly in immersion, that really lands a lot on that explicit and systematic instruction to really build those word banks. And I was really enjoying kind of creating this slide and thinking about how, especially in French immersion, knowing that learning the meaning of new words really helps deepen understanding of words that we may already be familiar with, and how can we relate those to known words and concepts. So thinking about how we build those knowledge networks. And that starts, I know from my experience, 14 years in kindergarten French immersion, I saw a lot of that network building, and you could almost see those neurons firing. And thinking about how we can demonstrate an understanding of words by sorting, categorizing, and classifying them based on semantic features. And I know I had many conversations with colleagues that worked within and around French immersion when we looked at, for example, EQAO and mathematics, and seeing that oftentimes what we noted was the mathematical vocabulary of students in French immersion was quite strong because it had to be taught in such a systematic and explicit way. Also thinking about how we link those new words to previously learned words based on those semantic features, recognizing certain words have multiple meanings. In this case, the word is baguette. So like we know that there's the bread that we all might find yummy. Sorry, gluten-free, so it's a little challenge. Or the magical wand, right? And baguette. Knowing to be able to use words flexibly. And I know that historically speaking, there were some things that we use to maybe support vocabulary development, but knowing if in some contexts, petite might be a little different than petit, right? So thinking about if we're talking about a person, for example, petit could be one thing, whereas we're talking about a coffee cup, it's a whole other thing. So knowing how can we use those words flexibly and add new meanings to previously learned words to really build that depth of vocabulary. And thinking about with teacher support and direct instruction, how we can understand those categories to be able to sort and resort. So I know a lot of this for me comes into thinking about math and emotions and those words that we use on a daily basis, but also connecting to those other curricular areas. I know like looking into STEAM, like how can we build that vocabulary and make those connections with that direct support. So using pictures, objects, photographs, written words, and helping students sort them into subcategories and categories. So for example, here you'll see, sorting food and clothing, but from there, separating them into even further groups. So perhaps we're looking at seasons, for example. Also thinking about we can use antonyms that relate to everyday events and refer to their attributes, position, location, size. So thinking about on, off, hot, cold, froid, chaud, été, hiver, jour, nuit, petit, grand, des choses comme ça. And knowing that with teacher support, we can really demonstrate and increase that awareness and understanding of words with multiple meanings. So just really helping and explicitly supporting students through that. Also working on those independent word learning strategies. So thinking about the meaning of unfamiliar words. So for example, grandeur, looking around and outside the word. So using the context, examples, synonyms, antonyms, and looking also inside the word. So knowing the word grand is in there, and that's going to help us determine the meaning of that word grandeur. Using our morphological awareness to support the understanding of the meaning of new words. For example, if we know poli, that's using merci and being polite, then impoli, understanding that that is the opposite of that. Beginning to build an awareness of self-monitoring, and that's, I know we're going back to the oral language session when we look at this, but really how could we maybe use this tool to self-monitor and think about what do we do when we don't understand a word and how do we work our way to that understanding of new vocabulary. Also considering that words have different roles. So thinking about that tier 1, those basic words used in everyday language, tier 2, frequent high utility academic words appearing across content areas, and tier 3, those domain specific low frequency words. And noting that the kindergarten curriculum really focuses on those tier 2 words so that have been explicitly taught in various subject areas and in various contexts. So how can we use these words in engaging in conversations, asking and answering questions, and using new vocabulary in different contexts? So thinking of words like expliquer, stratégie, compréhension, complexe, illustrer, décrire, capable, and how we might be able to weave those into our everyday. Using that morphological awareness, so being able to recognize and understand those high frequency morphemes. So for example, S, si on ajoute S, we mean more than one. Or for example, looking at heureux versus malheureux, what is using that morphological awareness to develop an understanding and to understand those words. And then of course, going back to remembering that our learners are truly those niveau A1, beginning level learners based on the CA, SCR. So really looking at those familiar expressions, daily expressions, simplifying and really getting to those basic needs first and then building upon that vocabulary, being able to talk about ourselves in a simple and meaningful way though. And then of course, knowing that the person that's speaking to us wants to speak slowly and be cooperative. using what we know about students is critical here. So using our observation to think about what is it that we hear students saying, what are they doing, what are they representing, to understand what vocabulary do they maybe have that receptive language piece for, and then what vocabulary do they have the expressive piece for, and how can we best support those next steps. I really wanted to pull it back to what we talked about if you were here for the flow of the day session and talk about how can we ensure that we're supporting that vocabulary development throughout the day. So knowing that from outdoor exploration, whole group, and especially through play, those transitions, small group, how can we build in those opportunities for students to develop their vocabulary? So thinking about in whole group, I know we talked a little bit about using those really rich texts, looking to try to find, of course, Canadian authors and diverse Canadian authors, but how can we use those books and perhaps use a repeated reading to continue to develop that vocabulary? The one thing I wanted to highlight here is, so I know oftentimes we're like, well, I don't have that book. So thinking about the resources from Parlons Science, that's actually a free digital book, as well as Tu Peux, and Idelo, of course, using the videos from Idelo to help support that vocabulary development is also really valuable. And I know that they're working currently on some specific kindergarten resources to support that. But again, using that repeated reading with the intention of developing vocabulary for a specific purpose is really going to help that vocabulary development. Then thinking also about how might we use that whole group instruction. So maybe it's the turn and talk with a partner, all of those strategies that we know just through supporting second language acquisition and how valuable they might be, using songs and dance and gesture throughout the day as we transition from one space to another. And of course, thinking about how we can support that outdoors and indoors is really critical. And of course, supporting vocabulary in small group also. I know that we know the importance of supporting that decoding within small group instruction, but how can we support that, whether it be through play, inquiry, responsive play, as whether it be a double educator room or a single educator room? And how might we set up our environment to support that vocabulary development? So here, looking at, for example, at a provocation station with Qu'est-ce que tu vois as they're talking through the life cycle and having already provided students with the vocabulary so that they can already talk about that in French is critical too. Supporting students in a small group outdoors is also another opportunity. And as we maybe dive into something that to build the students' interest, building vocabulary. So here you'll see a spaceship. In this class, the students were really, really excited about space. So they worked through their vocabulary and had an opportunity to not just develop their vocabulary, but apply it in a play-based setting. So thinking again about how we can use play to practice, support, and extend that vocabulary. And I want to go back to that piece in chapter 5 of Strive for 5 that really helps us look at some strategies to do that. Again, thinking about how we can use our observation and perhaps, as we're observing students in play, might there be an opportunity for us to take a moment and support them in developing the vocabulary connected to making those connections and practice the new learning of the vocabulary. And then thinking, of course, because in our case, with the thinking of this quotation from the Effective Early Reading Instruction document and differentiating for multilingual learners, that this can be particularly important for some students, including our students in French immersion, that while they're learning the language of instruction and developing vocabulary, we really want them to develop and maintain proficiency in their first and other languages. And this is where I know I get asked a lot about that piece about, parents want to support at home. And this is a really great opportunity for parents to continue to interact with their child, pull in those really meaningful texts, reading, singing, all of those things in their first language is going to really help support not just vocabulary development in their first language, but also just that love of their first language, and then making those connections as we support their French immersion learning at school.